If you are buying or selling a home and you do not understand these 3 real estate terms, you could accidentally lose money, lose the house, or create lots of unnecessary stress. So today I'm taking it to school. We're going to break down 3 terms I hear misunderstood all the time, and I'm going to explain it to you. Remember, I used to be a teacher, so I'm going to explain it to you in plain English so you actually know what they mean before you write or accept an offer. Hi, I'm Jamie Herring with the Herring Homes team of Coldwell Banker Realty, and let's jump right in. So term number 1 is an escalation clause. This is really easy to start with because I think they're the most common of the 3 terms we're going to talk about today. It comes up constantly in competitive markets for buyers and for sellers. So an escalation clause is a tool that buyers will use when there are multiple offers on the home. It allows the buyer to automatically increase their offer if another higher offer comes in. Does that make sense? So instead of guessing how much to offer, you're basically willing to say, I'm willing to beat another offer by a certain amount up to a certain limit. Sometimes they don't even have a cap on it. So here's how it usually works. The buyer submits an offer with a starting price, let's say $500,000. They include an escalation amount, which is how much they're willing to increase their offer by, let's say $10,000. And then they set a maximum price, so let's say $550,000. So if another offer comes in, let's say at $510,000, that buyer would end up paying $520,000. So it's a way to keep a little money in your pocket instead of just blindly giving your highest and best right from the beginning. But here's the part buyers and sellers don't always realize. Sellers are not required to even accept or consider an escalation clause. They can counter it, they can ignore it, they can choose another offer almost entirely. So most escalation clauses also require proof of a competing offer. This is the case in Illinois, which means the seller has to show that another offer actually came in and was legitimate and that it exists. You can't just say there's multiple offers when you don't have multiple offers. That's unethical for a realtor. There's also where you have, sometimes I've seen them, poorly written escalation clauses and they backfire. Sometimes the buyer reveals their maximum number when they didn't even need to, or the clause is written so poorly or vaguely that it creates confusion or delays. Term number 2, appraisal waiver or appraisal gap waiver. So next up is an appraisal waiver, an appraisal gap waiver, and appraisals are required for almost all mortgage buyers, just so you know. And this will make people nervous because you're kind of like, you're waiving the appraisal. You are saying you're going to cover the difference. So first, it's important to understand what an appraisal actually does. An appraisal is ordered by the lender to confirm that the home is worth the purchase price on the contract. The home is worth what the buyer is paying. It protects the lender, not the buyer. If a home appraises for less than the purchase price, there is a gap between what the lender is willing to lend and what the buyer is willing and agreed to pay. That gap has to be covered somehow, or the deal will fall apart. I had a home that I first purchased in Grayslake, Illinois, way back when, and it did not appraise at the purchase price. So my husband and I brought extra money to the table to meet the purchase price. So that's what an appraisal gap waiver does. The buyer will agree in advance to a specific dollar amount if the appraisal comes in low. So for example, if the house gets run up with multiple offers, a buyer might say, I'll cover up to $20,000 if there's an appraisal shortfall. So this means if the home is purchase price is $500,000, but the appraiser comes in and he's like, $450,000, and they can't argue it. It's really hard to get an appraiser to change that. So then the seller would make $470,000 if there's a $20,000 appraisal gap waiver, and the buyer, instead of financing $500,000, they would finance $450,000, but they'd have to bring $20,000. Not part of the deal. They'd have to bring $20,000, liquid to the closing table in addition to their down payment. So you have to have that money available. That's the kicker. A lot of buyers are like, I'll cover the difference. But when push comes to shove and it actually happens, they actually have to have that money available, and not everyone has their down payment of, let's say, $100,000 and another $20,000 that they can throw at the deal. This is one of those strategies that are very effective when it's used correctly, and it's very risky when it's not. So the details here really matter. I just want to give you another example. So let's say the purchase price is $500,000 and the buyer says, I will cover $20,000 if it doesn't appraise. And the appraiser comes in and he says $480,000. Now the seller's happy because they're still getting $500,000. They're getting the $480,000 from the mortgage, and the $20,000 the buyer has to bring additionally to the table. But as I mentioned, that buyer has to have that gap money available or the deal could just fall apart. So the difference between an appraisal gap waiver and a full appraisal means no matter what happens, that buyer is going to buy the house. Really, in a way, they're waiving financing, almost. I mean, really they are. They're waiving financing. So it means if they say, I'm going to pay $500,000 for this house on the contract, and the appraiser comes in and says $300,000, that buyer has to pay $200,000 out of pocket. That's a lot. So you want to be very careful with this one. A full waiver means that the buyer is agreeing to cover the entire difference between the appraised value and the purchase price, no matter how large that gap is. From a seller's perspective, this is very attractive because it removes a big point of uncertainty. Basically, the offer is almost as good as cash. From a buyer's perspective, it can be risky because you need to know how much cash you need to bring to closing. And remember, this is in addition to your down payment. Here's a kicker. Some lenders, because your credit is really good and the house was priced well and you didn't go crazy running up the price, you can ask your lender for a desktop appraisal or to waive the appraisal. And that means the bank, the lender, that company feels so confident in the value of the home, there doesn't need to be an appraisal, or they'll look at it without sending an appraiser out there because they're very confident the loan to value is there. That's a way to protect yourself without putting everything on the line. Term number 3 is as is. So this term is probably the most understood phrase, and I think it's the most abused phrase by realtors and buyers and even sellers. So let's say the house is listed as is. Buyers often assume it means no inspection, no negotiations, no protections. So that's usually not true. When a home is listed as is, let's say it's an estate. A lot of estate sales are listed as is. It typically means the seller is signaling they do not plan to make repairs. It does not mean the buyer cannot do a home inspection. Hear me in the back. You can still have a home inspection. It does not mean that the seller can hide defects. It does not automatically remove the buyer's ability to walk away, depending on the contract. In most cases, buyers can still inspect the home, gather information, and then decide whether or not they are comfortable moving forward with the purchase. What usually changes is that the seller doesn't want to make repairs. They're not willing to fix things that show up on that home inspection report, or they're not willing to offer credits. So your offer should reflect that you understand that. I see sellers use as is incorrectly, and I see buyers panic over it unnecessarily. Like everything in real estate, the actual contract language and situation matter more than the label. But let's talk for a moment how an as-is condition can make your offer as a buyer stronger. So as a buyer, you come in and you see the house, it's in nice shape. You could choose to make your offer as is. Most likely on your contract, there's a box you're going to check. Okay, in Illinois, there's a box that says you understand it's as is. You can waive the inspection, which means you cannot have a home inspection. You can't. You're waiving the home inspection. You can't use that to get out of the deal. The second box, it'll say you're going to have an inspection with requests. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory. You can make requests after the home inspection. Or it's going to say you can have a home inspection with no requests. Now that one is probably what I see the most often in Illinois. That means the buyer can have a home inspection, but they cannot ask for a seller to fix anything or offer a credit. Here's why I said this is being abused. As primarily a listing agent, I will see this all the time on contracts. That buyers will say that they understand they're going to do a home inspection for knowledge only and they're not going to make any requests. Well, what happens is when they find a big crack in the basement, or radon is the natural gas, we've talked about that, and they come back and they say, hey, Mr. Seller, I know I said I wasn't going to make any requests, but I actually am going to make requests. So now the seller who chose this offer because it was as is, now is put in a situation where either the minute they make a request, the deal can be canceled because the buyer's not holding up their end of the bargain, right? But the seller now may consider, be like, okay, there was mold in the attic. How could the buyer have known that? So I'm going to go ahead and remediate that mold. So sometimes you get sellers who do honor those requests. And then other times I have sellers that are like, go pound sand. I'm not fixing it. It was as is. It's still as is. I'm not giving you a credit, and go find a new house. So now the buyer has to decide, okay, do I still want to go forward with the as-is offer that I made, or do I want to cancel the contract, which they have the right to do? It's annoying to me when we get an as-is deal and then they come back with requests. So buyers, please understand that when you write something and you say in the contract, home inspection with no requests, that's what it means. Now in Wisconsin, conversely, it's not an issue. Maybe because Illinois is an attorney state and we use attorneys, but in Wisconsin, it's not even something that we see very often. Like once the deal's done, like the seller has the right to remedy those defects, and then it's done. It's two different states, two very different ways. And I bet in your state, it's different than this as well. So these three terms alone can completely change the type of offer you write, how strong your offer is, how risky it is, how smooth the closing goes. And as a seller, these are three very different things that you need to consider and that your realtor should explain to you. So you should know that these things should never be used as a one-size-fits-all strategy, but your offer could have all three: an appraisal gap waiver, an escalation clause, and be as-is. Just know that. So if you're buying or selling, make sure someone is explaining these things to you before you sign anything, not after. But you should know that buyers, this is a way to make your offer stand out. If this was helpful, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.